When I first moved to Carlsbad, New Mexico for a job as a park ranger at Carlsbad Caverns National Park, I knew that caving was going to become a big part of my life. The Pecos Valley of southeast New Mexico is one of the densest caving regions on Earth, with more than 10,000 caves, many unmapped, and many more not surveyed in decades. And naturally, as a beginner, I started looking for milestones to look forward to, ways to improve my skills. After joining the local grotto, I met some really cool like-minded folks, and I realized the first thing I needed to do was learn the ropes. Literally. I needed to learn to ascend and rappel. Now, I generally pride myself on self-sufficiency, but I also pride myself on remaining alive. So in caving, I really needed a mentor. I met a friend through the grotto who was really keen on taking out newbies, and he and I kind of practiced on a rig he set up in his backyard to where I could just go up and down indefinitely. It was a really cool system. I might try to recreate it on the channel at some point. But anyway, after a few sessions of practice, I managed to pass the NCRC vertical exam. I passed this exam so that I could go into caves on NPS official business. It's not a requirement if you're just getting into caving. But once I did that, I was ready for my first vertical cave. Now, most people, when they think of caves, they think of limestone caves like Carlsbad Caverns, like Mammoth Cave, like Luray Caverns. But limestone caves in reality are only a small sliver of the types of caves that actually exist in the world. In fact, solution caves don't even need to form in carbonates like limestone or dolomite, and a lot of them form in evaporites like gypsum. And in the Pecos Valley, there are a lot of gypsum caves. In fact, the very first cave I went into, at least that wasn't already a show cave, was a different gypsum cave in the Pecos Valley called Parks Ranch Cave. So for a brief geology lesson, this will all be relevant later. During the Permian period, about 251 to 299 million years ago, this entire area was covered in water. Basically a series of shallow inland seas, one of which was the Delaware Sea. And that covered the area around Carlsbad, New Mexico. And as tends to happen with restricted inland seas, they're cut off from access from the ocean. It accumulated a lot of organic matter very quickly. So basically over time, as the sea level lowered, the concentration of both salt in the water and organics in the mud rose. And the result today is the Permian Basin, which is made up of layers of these organic rich sediments and then evaporites and limestones. Pressure and heat created hydrocarbons over time, which ended up locked under impermeable cap rocks like those layers of evaporites and limestone. And eventually the oil industry came along and started drilling to get them out. In fact, today an astonishing 48% of the US's total crude oil production comes from the Pecos Valley. If it were its own country, it would rank fourth among the top oil-producing countries in the world, behind only Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the rest of the United States, and beating out Canada and Iraq. If it were anywhere else on Earth, the US would have lots of strategic interests in the region. The point is, for my first vertical cave experience, we had plenty to choose from, and we decided on a nearby gypsum cave. It's a fairly obscure cave, there's not much information on it anywhere, and I'm not going to go too into specifics on location because I want to protect the cave, but it's in southeast New Mexico in the area between Carlsbad and Hobbs, along with, as I said, about 10,000 other caves. Now, I'll be honest, gypsum caves make me a bit nervous. They form in runoff channels, and so definitionally, when it rains, all of the water gets flooded to them. So to put it another way, if it suddenly rains while you're in the cave, you're dead. And that doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me in a part of the country where sudden rainstorms really aren't all that uncommon. Now, fortunately for us, there was no cloud cover and no forecasted rain anywhere in the vicinity, so we were pretty much good to go. So the first rappel is about 35 feet, and it's only a few feet into the cave. This is what makes it a great beginner cave, because 35 feet really isn't that long. Rattlesnakes frequently crawl into the entrances of caves in this area, and this one is no different. When you're rappelling into a dark hole in the ground and hear a rattlesnake rattle underneath of you, it can make things very exciting. And it could certainly make getting off the rope a bit spicy. And this is why I almost always carry a collapsible snake stick with me. I'll put a link to the one I use in the description. Fortunately for me, all of my training paid off when the first rappel was a breeze. And after the first rappel, there's another shorter one, and then you're in a spot where you can take off the rappelling gear and explore the passageways of the cave with a little more ease. And rattlesnakes aren't the only animals that find their way into this cave. There are also lots of frogs. More accurately, there are lots of toads. And I saw various species while I was in there, especially this Texas toad right here. And they get into the cave through various means, but getting washed in by rainwater, I'm sure, is one of them. And I'm not sure what happens to them after that. There are insects, including cave crickets inside of the cave, and none of them looked particularly malnourished. And while I am sure some escape, I suspect most stay within the confines of the cave. I'm not sure, but it is part of nature, and one of the things I have learned as a national park ranger is don't interfere with nature. There are some nuances to that, but we don't have time to get into those today. Now, the cave itself is strikingly beautiful. In a lot of gypsum caves, you'll find selenite crystals, and this particular cave had tons of them. Selenite, if you don't know, is a form of gypsum, and it forms when gypsum crystallizes into large, well-structured crystals. And that can only happen when growth is uninterrupted by environmental changes. Now, when environmental conditions are more chaotic, you'll find regular gypsum crystals, which take on more of a sugary texture. And something really amazing about the gypsum caves in southeast New Mexico is that you'll often find both types of crystals in the same place. And even more amazing than this, in some places you'll even find the presence of flowstone inside of gypsum caves. Like, look at this. This is a stalactite in a gypsum cave, right next to the selenite crystals. So one of those layers of limestone is above the cave in this spot, and as carbonate-rich water trickles through it, these small limestone speleothems form. And this is what I like to refer to as the fourth dimensional experience of caving. So we all know the three physical dimensions, height, width, and length, but the fourth dimension is time. And to plunge into a cave is to plunge into the depths of time. Periods of environmental calm, chaos, change are all evident right in front of you. To wriggle through a cave is to dance with geology. You're reminded of not only the power, but also the longevity of the forces of Earth itself. And these are forces we engage with every day, but are somehow oblivious to because of hundreds of layers of dissonance. But in a cave, these connections become apparent. And what really completes the dance with geology metaphor is that you are also doing a physical dance yourself. The amount of contorting and wriggling and crawling and climbing that you have to do in one of these things, even a cave that is not particularly difficult to navigate like this one, just dwarves the physical challenge of anything else I've ever done, save for maybe bow hunting. And in this cave, I got my first taste of how physically demanding things can get. So the three of us had gone down a narrow passage and come to a steep drop. Two of us belayed down that drop, and the trip lead stayed back to haul us out if we needed it. Now, there were no handholds to climb out of here, so it's on each other. So the task falls to all of us to help get each other out. At first, it was my colleague's turn, and from above, the trip leader started pulling her out, and I lifted from below. And she scrambled out pretty easily with our help. But then came my turn, and I was going to be a little harder to get out on account of the fact that I weigh 200 pounds. So the two of them kind of threw together a haul system and started pulling me upward. And I did what I could with my hands and feet against the passageways of the cave. And in tandem, we worked very slowly to get me up out of there. And although I was not really in any danger, the trip lead very much knew what he was doing. Putting yourself in a position where you are reliant on other people and completely at the mercy of the conditions around you is extremely humbling. And all the while, my brain kept wandering, as this was my first time in a cave like this. If it rains, you're dead. Obviously, I knew I'd get out, but how soon? And it probably heightened my sense of urgency more than it should have. And I started to feel panic creeping in. And when you feel even a little bit of panic in one of these situations, it starts to spiral. And once I got near the top, I found a place I could grab onto and I could hold on and ground myself a bit. And this is why I'm always talking about how you can apply the principles of meditation to the outdoors to ground yourself. Because in moments where I've panicked or where I've been afraid, what I always come back to is that you are surrounded by stillness. In a cave, that's especially true. It's quiet, it's still, there's no urgency. You have the rest of your life to get out of this cave. As I settled back in, I assessed the situation more rationally. We had checked the weather before coming in. The risk of a sudden rainstorm was very low. My trip lead absolutely knew what he was doing and could get me out of here. And then my mind continued wandering, but in more passive observational ways this time. And being bound by those structures around me really got me thinking about how fragile human beings are. I was no more powerful to change the confines of my situation than a glass bottle at sea is to change the tides. I was just working within the system, and I had no choice at that moment but to relax into the situation as it was. Now, the time came for one last push, and there was a ledge above me that I knew I could use to push myself out. So I kicked my legs back and upward like a scorpion's tail, and I pushed myself out. Flexibility is a big plus in a cave. And now that I was out, my mind was still glued to where it had gone earlier. And that was when we happened upon a flake of chert that was in the cave. This is a lithic flake, so this is a flake that was created when a stone tool was being made hundreds of years ago. So at some point, this flake had been washed into the cave by the very forces that created the cave in the first place. And another thing, at least to my knowledge, chert is not native to the Pecos Valley. So someone had to have either traveled to gather this chert or had to have traded for it. And that to me illustrated further how the forces of our environment are just completely beyond our control. There's salt here, chert there, and these are scattered across the landscape by forces hundreds of millions of years older than the people who need them. And just as I had been bound by stone walls and reliant on others to get out of there, so too had the people who inhabited this landscape been bound by the bedrock beneath their feet. So as I emerged from the cave, I looked out over the Pecos Valley, and if you live in the area, you know that the oil fields at night look like a city. In fact, when I worked at Carlsbad Caverns, people would often stay after bat flight and ask me, what city is that? And I would tell them, that's not a city, that's the oil field. And seeing that after what I'd just done, my mind turned to the bigger picture. You can turn basically any topic of study or conversation all back to geology. The very forces that turned this area that I'm talking about into what we refer to as the Yosemite Valley of caving also turned it into a landscape totally characterized by oil. And I thought in that moment a lot about how travel and trade in modern times revolves around places like this, and how highways and shipping routes had to be constructed to get to these places. And I thought about what oil drilling had done to the natural beauty of this place, from the lights of the rigs drowning out the lights of the stars, to the air pollution, to the physical destruction of caves by oil drills. And all of this determined by forces billions of years old. And broadening the scope, I thought back to that chert flake I'd found in the cave. And I thought about who made it. Maybe Mescalero Apache, maybe Southern Ancestral Pueblo. And I thought about the rich cultural traditions of those indigenous groups, and more broadly about the incredible diversity of indigenous cultures worldwide. And I thought about the ancestral Polynesians using the stars above and the currents below to guide them on these long ocean voyages. Those currents weren't invented by people, people inherited them. They were created once again by geology. They were influenced by seafloor topography and continental positions. These all changed over time. Highways today, by and large, follow the path of least resistance. And all of those paths, whether it's a river, whether it's a mountain pass, those are totally at the mercy of geology to have formed in the exact way that they did. And going even a step further, a country's chief imports and exports will be tied to what is or is not present in that country's vicinity. And that's also determined by geology, either directly, like the presence of cobalt, lithium, oil, or indirectly by creating the soils that are rich enough to allow for farming, or for dense, healthy forests to be logged, or going back before agriculture even, these microhabitats determined by geology that allow for the richness of game in one particular place that allowed for one civilization to become healthy and sustained enough to advance forward. And through hundreds of thousands of years of those forces driving the way that humans advance the way they do, and those compounding forces shaping our world, who can say with any certainty that any of us have free will? If our destiny comes down to a genetic lottery and a world shaped by billions of years and hundreds of billions of human lifetimes. And what I realized is that we are the ocean currents, not acting on our own free will, but being influenced by forces beyond our control and greater than us. Each person is a beautiful creation of happenstance, carrying with them a knowledge and experience that is and can only have been shaped by those influences. Each culture is, in turn, a creation of collective happenstance. And when those people band together, they can create beautiful things, art, poetry. And it dawned on me that choosing to experience other people's cultures may be the only form of free will that we actually have. And tying this back to caving, to descend into a cave is to directly surrender yourself to those same forces. In fact, to enter the wild in any capacity is to do exactly that. And I think that's why so many people feel uncomfortable in the presence of truly wild places, because it requires us to confront our deepest feelings of insecurity in the presence of nature in the most intimate and direct way possible. Because even the impulses of my own mind were shaped by my homeland. That would be the Ridge and Valley Appalachians of West Virginia. That place had the combination of fertile enough soil to support the farm I grew up on and enough natural beauty to keep me interested in going back and venturing off into the woods and along the creeks. And perhaps this is the true beauty of Earth, not our free will, but our lack of it.